Hello, Capricorn. I'm really happy you're here today. Before we begin, just allow yourself to settle into this moment. You don't have to force anything to happen. You don't have to search for every answer right away. Just listen to what resonates with your heart and leave behind anything that doesn't. As I begin laying these cards on the table, there's a very quiet but incredibly powerful energy surrounding you. It feels like someone has been trying so hard to convince themselves that they could move on from you. They may have buried themselves in work, responsibilities, routines, or simply kept telling themselves that time would eventually erase what they felt. But something about your energy refuses to disappear. The first card arriving here is the Lovers, and it immediately shifts the atmosphere. This doesn't feel loud or dramatic. It feels deeply personal. It feels like someone reaching a point where pretending no longer works. They may have believed distance would make everything easier. They may have thought that focusing on their career, fixing other parts of their life, or staying constantly busy would slowly replace what they shared with you. Yet every step they took away somehow led their thoughts right back to Capricorn. I keep sensing this person trying to understand why that keeps happening. Yeah, it almost feels frustrating for them because they like having control. They like believing every decision they make follows logic. But feelings rarely follow rules, do they? The harder they tried to organize their life without you, the more often your presence quietly returned. A familiar song, a place they once visited with you, a conversation that unexpectedly reminded them of your voice. None of it seemed planned, yet it kept happening. Then Six of Cups gently appears, almost like an old photograph being pulled from a forgotten drawer. I don't feel this person is simply remembering events. They're remembering how they felt around you. That's a very different kind of memory. They remember feeling understood without needing to explain themselves. They remember conversations that somehow stayed with them much longer than they expected. They remember your calmness, your patience, the way you never needed to compete for attention because your presence spoke for itself. It feels like that's what they miss the most. Not excitement, not drama, stability. The quiet confidence you carried made them feel safe in ways they didn't fully appreciate before. Oh my God! They're beginning to realize that people can imitate your appearance, your interests, or even your words, but no one carries your energy the way you do. That realization seems to be arriving little by little, almost unexpectedly. Now the Hermit comes into view, and everything becomes quieter. I sense this person pulling away from distractions rather than from you. They may still appear distant on the outside, but internally they're asking themselves questions they avoided for a long time. Why couldn't they let you go? Why does your name still cross their mind during the busiest moments of the day? Why does every attempt to move forward somehow circle back to the same connection? It almost feels as though they're examining parts of themselves they never wanted to face before. They're beginning to recognize that it wasn't Capricorn who frightened them. It may have been the depth of what they felt whenever they were around you. Sometimes people step away, not because love isn't present, but because it asks them to become more honest than they're ready to be. And then I notice Page of Swords quietly standing nearby. This energy feels subtle. It doesn't necessarily suggest dramatic action. Instead, it feels like curiosity that refuses to disappear. This person may occasionally check on you without saying anything. They may wonder how you're doing. They may replay old conversations in their mind, searching for something they overlooked. Even if they don't reach out, their attention seems to drift toward you much more often than they would ever admit. What surprises me most is that this no longer feels like simple nostalgia. It feels like awareness slowly replacing denial. They aren't just remembering Capricorn anymore. They're beginning to recognize your place in their story. That difference matters. Because once someone reaches that realization, silence starts feeling much heavier than conversation. I wouldn't be surprised if this person has recently caught themselves thinking something they never imagined they would. A thought that quietly appeared without permission. A A thought that simply said, maybe I need to talk to Capricorn. And somehow, as these cards settle on the table, it feels like that thought is only the beginning of something much bigger waiting to unfold. Something shifts as these cards settle onto the table. It isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, it feels more like a quiet realization that has been growing beneath the surface for a long time. I keep sensing someone looking back at conversations they once dismissed, only to discover that your words have stayed with them far longer than they expected. It's almost as if they're hearing your voice differently now. The first card appearing here is the High Priestess, and I immediately feel this beautiful connection to intuition. Capricorn, there may have been moments when you sensed something wasn't being said. You didn't always have proof. You couldn't always explain why you felt the way you did, yet something inside you kept whispering that there was more beneath the silence. This person may have believed they were hiding their emotions perfectly, but your presence seemed to see beyond what they allowed the world to notice. It's interesting because I don't feel they're remembering arguments as much as they're remembering the moments when you quietly understood them without needing an explanation. They may have wondered how you always seemed to recognize when something wasn't right. At the time, they may have brushed it aside or even questioned your perspective. Yeah, but life has a curious way of bringing people back to the truths they weren't ready to hear. As the moon slowly reveals itself, I sense emotions becoming impossible to ignore. This person seems to be standing in front of feelings they've kept hidden, perhaps even from themselves. They might wake up thinking about you without knowing why. Your name may cross their mind during completely ordinary moments. A familiar number appears on the clock. A song begins playing at exactly the right time. Someone casually says something that reminds them of a conversation the two of you once shared. Oh my God. They're beginning to notice these little moments instead of dismissing them. It doesn't necessarily mean they suddenly have every answer. It simply feels like they're becoming more willing to ask questions they never asked before. Why does Capricorn still appear in my thoughts? Why do certain memories suddenly feel so vivid? Why do I keep feeling like something between us remains unfinished? The energy becomes even stronger as judgment arrives. This card doesn't feel like punishment to me today. It feels like awakening. I sense someone reaching a place where excuses no longer bring them peace. They're beginning to recognize that some of the things you once expressed weren't criticism at all. You were simply seeing what they couldn't see inside themselves. At the time, that may have felt uncomfortable. Looking back, it feels honest. There may even be specific conversations replaying in their mind. Simple moments. A sentence you spoke. A concern you gently expressed. Something you hoped they would understand. They may have responded with silence or resistance back then, but those same words seem to carry completely different meaning today. Life has given them experiences that slowly uncovered exactly what you were trying to say. I also notice 8 of Cups, and this feels deeply personal. It isn't just about walking away from situations anymore. It feels like walking away from old patterns that no longer fit who they're becoming. They may be questioning habits they've held on to for years, relationships that no longer feel genuine, ways of thinking that once felt comfortable but now seem strangely empty. Sometimes growth begins when someone realizes they can no longer return to the version of themselves that existed before a certain connection changed them. You may not even realize how much your quiet strength influenced this person. Capricorn often teaches through consistency rather than speeches, through actions rather than promises. It feels like they're beginning to appreciate that difference. They aren't only remembering what you said, they're remembering how your life reflected those words. That kind of authenticity is difficult to forget once someone truly notices it. I also sense their intuition becoming much stronger than it used to be. They may not describe themselves as spiritual. They may still question what they're experiencing, but something inside keeps nudging them toward reflection instead of avoidance. Every time they attempt to dismiss this connection, another unexpected reminder seems to appear, not in a forceful way, but gently enough that it captures their attention. It almost feels as though 2 separate paths have been quietly moving toward the same place without either person fully realizing it. Whatever has remained unspoken seems to be asking for space to breathe. A conversation doesn't appear to be forming because of pressure. It feels like it's growing naturally from understanding that has taken time to mature. And as these cards rest together, I can't help but feel that someone is getting closer to saying the words they've carried in silence for far longer than anyone realizes. There's a heaviness settling over these cards that feels impossible to overlook. It's different from longing, different from curiosity. This feels like someone finally sitting alone with the weight of their own choices. Sometimes life becomes very quiet before a person truly hears their own heart, and that's exactly the atmosphere surrounding this reading. The first card resting on the table is Five of Cups, and I immediately sense regret that wasn't fully understood until recently. It feels like this person has started looking back at certain moments between the two of you with completely different eyes. Situations they once minimized suddenly seem much bigger. Conversations they hurried through now carry meaning they couldn't recognize before. They may have believed that time would simply smooth everything over, that eventually both of you would move on without ever needing to face what happened. Instead, something inside them keeps returning to the places they tried to leave behind. It isn't because they're forcing themselves to remember. The memories simply arrive on their own, almost asking to be acknowledged. Yeah, I keep feeling this quiet realization that Capricorn wasn't asking for perfection. You were asking for honesty. You weren't expecting someone to always have the right words. You simply wanted to know where you stood. Looking back, this person seems to recognize how many opportunities they had to be open, yet fear or uncertainty kept getting in the way. As Nine of Swords appears, the energy becomes even more personal. I don't necessarily feel constant sleepless nights, but I do sense thoughts becoming much louder whenever everything else becomes quiet. They may wake up in the middle of the night, replaying certain decisions. They may wonder what would have happened if they had answered differently, if they had stayed instead of pulling away, if they had trusted their feelings instead of questioning every emotion that appeared. Oh my God! It's almost like they're discovering that unresolved emotions don't disappear simply because they're ignored. They wait, patiently, until someone is finally ready to face them. One thing I keep noticing is that this person seems to understand your silence differently than they once did. There may have been a time when they interpreted your distance as giving up, but it feels like they're beginning to realize your silence may have been your way of protecting your own heart. Capricorn often carries pain quietly. You don't always announce when something hurts. You simply continue moving forward because that's what you've always known how to do. That realization seems to affect them deeply. The next card arriving is Justice, and it carries such a calm energy today. This doesn't feel like anyone being punished. It feels like balance slowly returning through understanding. Life has a way of allowing people to experience perspectives they once overlooked. I sense this person encountering situations that somehow mirror emotions you may have carried long ago. Perhaps someone disappointed them. Perhaps someone became emotionally unavailable. Perhaps promises weren't kept. Whatever form it takes, it feels like they're beginning to understand your experience not through explanation, but through their own journey. Sometimes that's the only lesson the heart truly accepts. I also feel them questioning themselves much more honestly than before. They're asking whether they were emotionally present, whether they truly listened, whether they allowed fear to make decisions that love should have made instead. Those questions don't seem easy for them, but they also feel necessary. Then Queen of Cups quietly enters the reading, and everything softens again. Your energy comes through as incredibly compassionate here. Not because you've forgotten everything that happened, but because your heart has never depended on resentment to stay strong. There is emotional maturity surrounding you that this person seems to admire more than ever. It feels like they're realizing how rare that kind of love actually is. Not the kind that demands attention, the kind that quietly offers understanding. They may even find themselves wondering whether they truly appreciated everything you gave while they had the chance. I also sense hesitation growing alongside this awakening. Wanting to apologize and knowing how to apologize are two very different things. This person may rehearse conversations in their mind without ever speaking them aloud. They may imagine reaching out only to question whether too much time has passed, whether Capricorn would even want to hear from them anymore. That uncertainty seems to weigh heavily on them because they understand something important now. A sincere apology isn't about erasing the past. It's about respecting the person who lived through it. As these cards remain together, I don't feel someone searching for the perfect excuse anymore. I sense someone searching for the courage to become more honest than they've ever been before. And sometimes, before honesty can be shared with another person, it first has to be spoken quietly to oneself. That inner conversation may be opening a door neither of you expected, and what stands on the other side could begin changing the direction of this connection in ways that are only starting to reveal themselves. There's a different feeling surrounding these cards. The energy isn't sitting in silence anymore. It feels like movement. Slow, careful movement, but movement nonetheless. I keep sensing someone reaching a point where carrying everything alone has become more exhausting than speaking the truth. Whatever has remained locked away inside their heart no longer feels sustainable. The first card stepping forward is Knight of Cups, and it carries an energy that feels surprisingly sincere. This person may have imagined dozens of conversations with you without ever saying a single word. They've replayed different versions in their mind, wondering how they would begin, what they should admit first, and whether they could ever find language that truly reflects everything they've been feeling. It almost seems as though they're realizing explanations are no longer about protecting themselves. They're about honoring what the connection deserved from the very beginning. Yeah, there's a softness here that wasn't present before. Instead of trying to defend past choices, they seem more interested in helping you understand what was happening inside them during those moments when everything appeared confusing. I don't feel this person wants to come toward you with dramatic promises or grand gestures. It feels much simpler than that. They want to remove the distance created by misunderstandings. They want you to know what they couldn't express when fear seemed louder than vulnerability. Sometimes people don't hide because they have nothing to say. Sometimes they hide because everything feels too important to risk saying imperfectly. As Ace of Pentacles settles onto the table, the atmosphere becomes surprisingly hopeful. This doesn't feel like returning to the past. It feels like standing in front of a completely different doorway. Whatever opportunity is appearing here seems grounded in reality rather than fantasy. It feels like someone asking themselves, if I were given another chance, would I finally show up differently? That's a powerful question. Because second chances aren't created by repeating old patterns. They're created by becoming someone capable of making different choices. I sense this person recognizing that possibility for the first time. They're beginning to understand that rebuilding trust isn't something that happens overnight. It's something that grows through honesty, consistency, and patience. Capricorn, those qualities already feel very familiar to your energy. Perhaps that's one reason this connection continues drawing their attention. Deep down, they may realize you've always valued actions more than beautiful speeches. Oh my God. I also keep feeling them becoming less afraid of uncertainty, not because every answer has appeared, but because remaining silent no longer feels like the safer option. Sometimes uncertainty shared together feels lighter than certainty carried alone. Then, Wheel of Fortune gently turns, and something inside this reading begins shifting. Timing has its own rhythm. There are seasons when people simply aren't ready to hear each other, no matter how deeply they care. Yet this card feels like two separate journeys quietly arriving at a place where understanding becomes possible. The circumstances surrounding both of you may not look exactly the same as they once did. Perspectives have changed. Priorities have evolved. Life itself has become the teacher. It feels like this person is recognizing that waiting forever may eventually become another form of regret. Every passing day seems to remind them that meaningful conversations don't always arrive when everything is perfect. Sometimes they arrive because both people have grown enough to approach them differently. The final card appearing here is Queen of Swords, and I immediately feel clarity entering the room. This energy doesn't ask for polished stories. It doesn't ask for carefully crafted excuses. It asks for truth, pure truth, the kind that may feel uncomfortable at first, but leaves nothing hidden afterward. I sense this person becoming aware that Capricorn would probably recognize anything less than authenticity. You don't necessarily need someone to have every answer, but you do value honesty. You value someone willing to stand in front of you without masks, without blame, without trying to rewrite history. That realization seems to shape everything they're preparing to say. I even feel them practicing honesty with themselves before they ever bring it to you. They're acknowledging emotions they once dismissed. They're admitting mistakes without immediately searching for reasons to justify them. That quiet accountability feels much more important than any perfectly written apology. Whether this conversation happens sooner or later, it seems to carry the potential to change more than either of you currently realizes. Not because every problem instantly disappears, but because truth has a remarkable way of creating space where healing can finally begin. As these cards come to rest, another gentle shift begins to emerge. It doesn't feel focused only on words anymore. It feels like someone preparing to let their future choices speak just as clearly as their heart, and that may become the most meaningful chapter of this journey yet. Something feels lighter as I continue laying these cards across the table. The heaviness hasn't completely disappeared, but it no longer feels like someone standing still. It feels like someone finally deciding that remaining the same is more painful than becoming someone new. Growth rarely arrives all at once. It usually begins with one honest decision, followed by another, until an entirely different life slowly takes shape. The first card revealing itself is Queen of Wands, and I immediately notice a renewed sense of purpose surrounding this person. They're beginning to realize that confidence isn't about pretending everything is fine. It's about having the courage to face the parts of themselves they've avoided for so long. I sense them making small but meaningful changes that other people may not even notice yet. Maybe they're becoming more intentional with their time. Maybe they're distancing themselves from conversations that constantly pull them into negativity. Maybe they're learning to pause before reacting instead of allowing old habits to take over. Yeah, these changes seem quiet from the outside, but internally they feel enormous. There's something else standing out to me. This person no longer seems interested in proving anything to anyone. Before, they may have cared far too much about appearances, expectations, or keeping control over every situation. But that energy feels different now. It seems they're asking themselves a much simpler question. Does this actually help me become the person I want to be? Sometimes that single question changes everything. As Six of Pentacles arrives, the atmosphere softens even more. I sense this person reflecting on what balance truly means inside a relationship. It feels like they're recognizing that love cannot thrive when only one heart is carrying the emotional weight. They may be looking back and realizing there were times when you gave understanding, patience, and compassion without receiving the same sense of security in return. Oh my God, I don't feel they're counting mistakes anymore. I feel they're measuring sincerity. They're beginning to understand that real partnership isn't about keeping score. It isn't about who was right or who apologized first. It's about creating a space where both people feel valued enough to speak honestly and safe enough to remain vulnerable. That realization seems incredibly important to them. It almost feels like they're asking themselves whether they can become someone who contributes peace instead of uncertainty, someone who listens before assuming, someone who chooses consistency instead of emotional distance. Those thoughts seem to be reshaping the way they view not only this connection, but relationships as a whole. The energy deepens beautifully as the Hierophant appears. This card feels less about answers and more about guidance. I sense this person becoming willing to learn from life, instead of constantly trying to control it. They may be seeking wisdom in unexpected places. Some may spend more time in quiet reflection. Others may turn toward faith, trusted mentors, meaningful books, or conversations that encourage genuine growth. Whatever path they're taking, it feels like humility is replacing pride. That's not always an easy transformation. Sometimes people spend years believing strength means never admitting they're wrong. Yet, true strength often begins the moment someone becomes teachable. Capricorn, I also sense your quiet influence continuing to ripple through their life. You may never have realized how much your actions encourage them to think differently. The way you remained grounded during difficult moments, the way you valued loyalty over appearances. the way you carried responsibility without demanding recognition. All of those qualities seem to have left a lasting impression. They're beginning to see that emotional maturity isn't something people talk about. It's something they live. Then Wheel of Fortune returns, and this time its energy feels even more peaceful. Instead of waiting for life to change on its own, this person seems ready to participate in that change. They're beginning to understand that destiny may open doors, but walking through them still requires choice. Fear once appeared to make many of those choices for them. Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control. Yet those fears don't seem to hold the same authority they once did. They may still exist, but they no longer appear to be leading the way. That's a very meaningful difference. Because whenever love and fear stand in the same room, only one of them can guide the next step. It feels like this person is slowly allowing their heart to speak louder than their hesitation. Not perfectly, not all at once, but sincerely. As these cards settle into place, I can't help feeling that the transformation happening within them is preparing the ground for something much deeper than a simple reunion. Whatever unfolds from here seems destined to rest on honesty, mutual respect, and a willingness to build something stronger than what either of you left behind, and the final cards waiting ahead may reveal exactly where that path is leading. A sense of calm settles over these final cards, and it's different from everything we've felt throughout this reading. The uncertainty hasn't simply disappeared. It feels as though it has finally found a place where it no longer needs to hide. Sometimes the greatest turning points don't begin with dramatic gestures. They begin with one honest conversation that changes the way two people see each other forever. The first card resting before us is the Lovers, and the energy surrounding it feels incredibly sincere. I don't sense someone trying to convince you of anything anymore. It feels like they're finally ready to let their guard down completely. They've carried so many thoughts inside themselves for such a long time that silence has become heavier than the truth. I keep feeling this person wanting to tell you something they haven't fully admitted, even to themselves until recently. They've never truly stopped thinking about you. Life may have continued moving. Responsibilities may have filled their days. Distractions may have occupied their mind for a while. But every time they believed they had finally left this connection behind, something quietly reminded them of what they were still carrying in their heart. Yeah, it feels less like obsession and more like recognition. A recognition that some people leave an imprint that doesn't fade simply because time passes. There seems to be a desire here to clear away misunderstandings that have stood between the two of you for far too long. They may want you to understand what was happening beneath the surface during moments that once felt confusing or painful. Not to erase what happened, not to rewrite history, simply to allow honesty to stand where silence once existed. As Ace of Cups appears, the atmosphere becomes noticeably softer. I sense emotional walls beginning to lower, not because everything has been solved, but because openness finally feels safer than hiding. There is something beautiful about this energy. It doesn't ask either of you to pretend the past never happened. Instead, it gently invites both hearts to see whether something new can grow from everything that has been learned. Oh my God, I keep noticing how different this feels from the beginning of the reading. Earlier, so much energy surrounded fear, uncertainty, and questions left unanswered. Here, I sense willingness. A willingness to listen. A willingness to speak honestly. A willingness to allow vulnerability to exist without immediately trying to protect it behind pride. That alone changes the entire atmosphere. The next card arriving is Ten of Cups, and it carries such a peaceful feeling. Rather than focusing on what was lost, it seems to invite attention toward what could still be built together if both people choose to meet each other with honesty and patience. I don't see perfection here. I see two people who have been shaped by different experiences and who may finally understand that lasting connections are created one genuine conversation at a time. Capricorn, one thing feels especially clear. Your quiet strength seems to have remained consistent throughout this entire journey. You didn't need to chase clarity because your heart already sensed what words couldn't always explain. Sometimes intuition doesn't provide every detail. Sometimes it simply keeps reminding you not to abandon what your soul already understands. Then the star quietly shines across the reading, bringing with it an energy that feels incredibly healing. Hope returns here, but not in the form of unrealistic expectations. It feels grounded, gentle, mature, the kind of hope that appears after difficult lessons have already changed everyone involved. I also sense forgiveness becoming easier, not because anyone is expected to forget the past, but because carrying old pain forever eventually becomes heavier than setting it down. Healing doesn't necessarily erase memories. It changes the way those memories live inside us. Perhaps that's the greatest gift these cards are offering today. They remind us that people can grow. They remind us that hearts can become more honest. They remind us that understanding often arrives later than we expect, but it still has the power to transform everything that follows. As I gather these cards together, one final thought continues to stay with me. It feels quiet, but incredibly meaningful. Sometimes intuition doesn't appear to make you wait. It appears to prepare you for the moment when everything that has lived in silence finally finds its voice. Capricorn, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I truly appreciate you being here and sharing this beautiful energy. Take whatever resonates with your heart, leave behind whatever doesn't, and trust your own inner wisdom above all else. You are deeply valued, and I can't wait to see you again in the next reading. Until then, take good care of yourself. Goodbye for now.